Welcome to the TradeStation Masterclass. Today we're going to talk about ATR as a measure of volatility, which is today's title. It's a technical analysis presentation, so we're going to take a look at some of the technical indicators that are part of the TradeStation platform and share with you some variations of those technical indicators that you can apply in your analysis and trading. Let's do some of our introductions and disclosures before we get started. My name is Jesus Nava. I'm the Director of Client Training and Education for TradeStation Securities. I'm always glad to be here to talk about TradeStation and maybe give you some tips and tricks on how you can take full advantage of the TradeStation platform. Every symbol and idea that we talk about here is for educational purposes only. These are not recommendations of TradeStation. Also, active trading is not suitable for everyone, and past historical performance is no guarantee of future results. For anyone that needs additional information on these disclosures, please visit www.tradestation.com/important-information. All right, let me go ahead and get our files ready because I did want to share with everyone here some custom files that I put together this morning regarding this topic, which is ATR as a measure of volatility. All right, there it goes. It's a file. When you click on that link, it should automatically download the file for you. So you'll have to go into your downloads folder and you'll see it there. It's called ATR volatility percent. It's a zip folder because it contains not only the ELD, which has the custom indicator, but also a couple of workspaces that I have here on my TradeStation that pretty much set up the idea, and we'll go through that ourselves. Okay, let me go back. Let me shift over to my TradeStation platform and talk a little bit about ATR, how we can use it. One of the workspaces that you find in that zip folder is this one. Let me go ahead and disable some of these indicators, and we'll come back to them. I'm just going to right click and disable that bottom indicator and just look at the one that is built into the TradeStation platform and is an indicator that we're probably all familiar with. You can see the name of that indicator right here at the bottom. It's called the average true range. A lot of places they just abbreviate that and call it the ATR, but the ATR is a calculation that is used in many places, not only to measure volatility for a particular security, but also as a measure to set stops and targets based on how the security is moving. But in simple terms, ATR just measures how big the candles are, the distance between the highest high and the lowest low of each one of those candles. Let's go ahead and take a look here. In this example, I have Motorola right here on the left-hand side. This is set to a daily chart. And you guys see that there's two candles back to back that have a big body, right? One was a down candle, the other one's an up candle. But these are very big candles. If I were to click on the background on this chart, this is the way that you get the data tips window. And you can put your vertical axis right on top of any of these candles to look at the details of that candlestick or that bar. And you can see that on this particular one, which is July 25th, we had a high price of $395 and we had a low price of $385. So from $385 all the way to $395. So it moved almost 10 points. And I say almost 10 points because you look at the cents, it's 385.17 to 395.04. So it missed, the 10 points by just 13 cents. But it was almost 10 points from low to high. So that's what's called the range. And average true range calculates, an average of how big the bars are. And the length of the bar, from high to low, is a measure of volatility. How far are the prices moving up or moving down? And we're going to use that as a basis of the calculation of our custom study. And let's go ahead and take a look and try to talk about a scenario where we have two symbols and we're trying to decide which one would present a better trading opportunity for us based on price movements. on the left-hand side, we have Motorola. And on the right-hand side, we have NVIDIA. These are stocks that are they're not cheap. Motorola is $398 per share at the moment, and NVIDIA is $105 per share. But in terms of movement, when you measure how these securities are moving historically, they're very similar. If you look at the ATR measurement right here at the bottom, we can see that Motorola is about 6.12 or $6.12. And NVIDIA is about the same, $6.24. There's only like a 12 cents difference, but let's suppose that they're pretty much similar in terms of how far these securities are moving up and down. It's just an average of the last 14 bars. We can see that for Motorola, those two big candles that we pointed out are within those 14 bars. So it did have an impact on the value of the ATR. Because I mean, the majority of the bars here for Motorola are pretty much average. And all of a sudden you have these two big candles over here. So I'm sure that those two candles had a big impact on the ATR value here. But when we look at the average and we look at the past 14 days for Motorola, we can say, or we can tell that Motorola moves an average of $6 per day. That's what the ATR value is telling us. So when we compare Motorola to NVIDIA, we can say that in the past 14 days, these two securities have moved very similarly in terms of how far up or down the securities have moved. So if we were to take this in a practical trading example, we can pretty much determine that our movement would be the same. So if you had a 100 share investment on Motorola and a 100 share investment on NVIDIA, they would both generate the same amount of revenue or loss, depending on which direction the price is moving. So let's go ahead and take a look at that example. Let me open up my notepad and we're going to make some notes here. Let's suppose that, all right, and this is very simple, 100 shares of Motorola and 100 shares of NVIDIA. So if the security moves, let's say that plus it moves $6, and let's just say that we'll round that, to $6. And we have the same scenario on both sides. They both $6. What this means is that our revenue in this case would be $600, and for NVIDIA, it would be exactly the same, $600. If the two trades were exactly the same, 100 shares of MSI and 100 shares of NVIDIA, both moving about $6 each, it would give us an amount of $600 in movement. However, this is not the same as a return on capital, which is technically how traders think. How much return am I getting on these trades? So let's suppose our initial investment is $5,000. Okay, $5,000. In fact, let me go ahead and make that a little bit bigger. Let me make that $10,000. Let's suppose that we're going to invest $10,000 on each one of these securities. I'm going to do some math here because I'm going to do it on my calculator because I'm not good in my head, but I'm going to divide those $10,000 by the price of MSI, 398, and that gives me 25 shares. So I'm going to buy 25 shares of MSI at 398, which is the current price. Let's round that to 398. And for NVIDIA, if I'm investing the same $10,000, let me divide that into the 105.25. And that gives me about 95 shares. 95 shares of NVDA at 105. So you can see that depending on which security you do decide to invest on or invest in, it's a different quantity because the investment is always $10,000. So this is just straight math. What this means is that 25 shares of MSI, if they do move $6, that would give you 25 times 6, $150. The 95 shares of NVDA, if it moves the same $6, it would give you, this would be 95 times 6, it would be $570. So in terms of investment, we can see that the shares of NVIDIA would represent a better return on initial capital or a return on investment because we're making more money on the same investment, which is $10,000. So if we calculate our return this way, even though we're looking at two securities that practically move the same way, they both move about $6 in average. When we look at our investment, that's what really matters, and that's what really tells us, which one of these securities would be the better trade. In this case, NVIDIA seems to be a better investment because our return is much greater. So our return, if we were to calculate this, so on this one, it would be a 1.5% on our investment. And on this one, it's a 5.7% return on our investment. So this is what we're going to talk about today. How do we find securities that are moving similarly to other securities that we may be trading, but would pose a better investment for us? Which are the securities that are moving percentage-wise, that would present better opportunities for us in terms of revenue? So we're going to do some radar screen studies and some charting studies and some scanning today to find those opportunities. Let's go ahead and take a look. I have the study already applied here on my chart, so let me go ahead and just enable it. It's called the @MC ATR volatility percentage. And I'm going to do the same thing here on this chart on the right-hand side, studies, edit studies, and I'm going to turn this on. Now take a look. The ATR on both is about $6. But when you look at the indicator here that I provided in the zip folder, we have a 1.54 for Motorola, and we have a 5.96 for NVIDIA. These two numbers right here, they match somewhat the numbers that we found right here, the return on initial capital. And the only difference on this calculation that we have at the bottom, which still uses ATR, is that it takes the value of the security in reference and it uses it in the calculation and it turns that number into a percentage. So it takes whatever value the security is moving in average and it divides it by the value of the security, and that gives you a percentage movement. That's all that it's doing. In fact, let me go ahead and we're going to go and take a look at the easy language, not because this is a programming class, but I always like to look at the easy language to have a better understanding or a more detailed understanding of what the indicator is doing. Let me go ahead and take a look at the moving average, the average true range first. And you can see that the ATR is just a function that says average true range. This function can be opened, so I can right-click on that purple word and go to open the function, average true range, and that references another function that is true range. I can continue opening up the functions here, so right-click and open true range, and this, as you can see, that it's just the calculation or the mathematical formula of the true high minus the true low. And it's called the true high and the true low because it does take into account the gaps. So there's a calculation going on. It's not only the straight difference between the high and the low, it also takes into account the closing price of the prior bar. Because if the closing price of the prior bar is further down or further up, it'll use that price in the calculation of the ATR because it considers that price movement as well. So let me go ahead and close these functions. I'll leave the the ATR indicator opened here. I'm going to go back here to my TradeStation, and I'm going to right click on the one that I'm supplying in the zip folder, the custom study that we talked about. And let's take a look at the easy language of this one. So now you can see that it still uses the same function, AVG true range, but notice what it's doing here is dividing that by the close. This is the closing price of the security. So it takes the ATR, divides it by the closing price, and then multiplies it by 100, which tells us what percentage of the value of the security is that movement. So which securities are moving the most? If we were to do any type of scanning, we can rank and we can sort these securities by their ATR volatility percentage. Let me go over here to this second workspace, also provided with the zip folder. And what it does is it has this column added, which is the custom study, the @MC ATR volatility. It has the average true range as well. So if you wanted to see which of these securities was moving the most, not percentage wise, but net, you can double click on average true range and it'll sort, the securities in descending order. And you can double click again. This will be ascending order. So let me go and double click one more time. So anytime you want to invert the sort, just double click on the column header and it'll do it for you. You can see that NVR is a security that moves an average of $265 per day. That is impressive. However, it is understandable if you look at the price of the security. This is a security that is trading at $8,600 per share. So it does make sense that the security with that price tag moves $265 per day. So it's always in relationship to the price of the security. But take a look at the percentage of movement. The percentage movement here is only 3%. Even though the quantity of dollars seems to be big in terms of how much the security is moving in average, when it's looked at from a percentage point of view, is not that much compared to other securities. For example, we looked at NVIDIA that had a 5-point-something% movement. If we were to sort by the MC ATR volatility, then you start seeing those securities that have the most movement when compared to the price of their shares. Let me double click here, sorts in ascending order, double click one more time, then it sorts in descending order. So we have the top numbers at the very top. And you can see that out of the 500 symbols that make up the S&P 500, which is, the symbol list that I have here, the stock that has the greater percent movement is Dexcom with a 9.28% movement. This is an average movement in the past 14 days, which is impressive. But look at the price of the security. It's $70, even cheaper than what NVIDIA was. But the average true range is $6.50. If we wanted to see this security in a chart, we can. Let me go ahead and resize my radar screen, go to apps and open up a chart analysis. All right. Let's put it here and let me change the time frame to a daily chart. What we wanted to do is I wanted to look at the security and see, well, we have to change it. So let me go and link this to my radar screen and click on Dexcom right here. All right, so take a look at what's going on here. This may not be a very clear indication of movement. So it's very important that we look at charting as a way to confirm what we're looking at in radar screen. See, radar screen is telling me that Dexcom is a security that is moving 9% in average. When in reality, when I look at the candles over here, they look pretty standard to me. They don't look like they're getting out of control or that there's huge volatility spikes on these candlesticks. It doesn't look like that. The problem is that we have this huge gap here. This huge gap is going to take the ATR calculation out of control. We talk about gaps because ATR is a calculation that does take into account a big gap like this. So when we look at the ATR, when we look at the range, for example, on this candle that where the gap happened on July 26th, the price dropped all the way down to $66. And it was trading at 110. So this candlestick had a range, if you look at the high and the low, had a range of about $5 from 62 to 67, about $5. But in the ATR calculation, we're looking at the closing price of the prior bar. And the closing price of the prior bar is 107. So those $40 of difference are added to the ATR. It considers this bar that gapped down as having a range of over $45, which is pretty impressive. And considering the gap, I'm not sure what happened to Dexcom, but it does affect the calculation of the ATR because it's not really a measurement of it's not really a daily value that we're even though it's it's averaging all the daily values of ranges for the past 14 days. This is throwing off the calculation. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one, which is CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike has been in the news recently. We do see a dramatic drop in price for CrowdStrike, given all the issues they had, last week, I believe. And you can see in this particular case the difference. You can see that these candles are bigger, and they're getting bigger and bigger because of all the issues they've been having. So in a case like this, then the average to range, it is a reflection of where the prices are, or how the prices are moving, a sense of volatility. This particular case, yes, we have an 8% price movement percentage. Always remember that the percentages here don't necessarily mean percentage of return on initial capital, because it could also mean a drop in percentage of your initial capital. For CrowdStrike, for example, it's been on a downtrend. And this 8.43, although it seems like it's a positive thing, it's a positive thing for anybody that's short CrowdStrike, right? But anybody that would have held a long position, this 8.43% would have counted against them. All right, does that make sense? Any questions so far? Fernando's asking, is there a range percent to operate this at MC ATR vol indicator? It's a straight percentage calculation. So you can rank by the values like I just did and see what's the highest percentage, but there's no range that limits the calculation. It's just a straight mathematical, how much the security is moving, an average based on the ATR, and what that movement represents as a percentage based on the value of the security. So it takes the ATR, divides it by the value of the security, and that's how you wind up with a percentage. But there's no range here. If I double click here and look at the smallest one, we can see that the smallest one is Catalent CTLT. If I click on it, it's just an indication that the bars have become very small. There's not a lot of movement. Although it's a security that is trading at $59, the range is pretty small. It moves about 43 cents in average per day. It hasn't had that behavior throughout history. You can see that certain periods of history do have bigger candles. This is just recently in the past 14 days. Do you have flexibility on changing the look back period? Of course you do. If I come over here to this indicator, I right click on the header and I go to studies and click on edit ATR volatility percent for all symbols. In the inputs tab, you have access to the ATR length. So you can decide, okay, how many trading days do I want to include in the calculation of this ATR? If I wanted to maybe grab many of those bigger bars that I see in history, let's say that I want to turn that into a 30. If I click OK, this recalculates. Of course, I didn't do it on the average true range. Let me go ahead and do it as well. Let's do 30 days for the ATR length. And you can see that instead of 43 cents, CTLT now moves an average of 50 cents. Not a big jump, but you can see how an increase or an adjustment on the number of bars that it uses in the calculation does have an effect on the number. So now we have an 86% movement here. If we rank by this value now, you can see that the symbols do change. This was not the symbol that we were looking at just a moment ago. This is a super microcomputer, but based on a 30-day or 30 trading day average true range, this is the one that has the highest movement with an 8.4% average. All right. So in addition to applying this indicator to a pre-selected list of symbols like the one that I have here on the screen, this is the S&P 500. It also works on futures. If you are a futures trader, this same radar screen has a tab for futures, and you can see the exact same calculation for futures. Now, futures is a little bit more over the place because we have securities, we have commodities that, for example, the S&P E-mini or the NASDAQ that are, the value is pretty high. For example, here the NASDAQ 100 is 19,000. Some other commodities here are very low, like 0.05 for the Mexican peso continuous contract. So some of these, the range of values in commodities is big. So if we were to sort by this, it would just give you, the average true range would just be a straight movement or the net value movement for the past 14 days. Percentage-wise, for example, out of all the major market indices, the one that has the biggest percentage movement is the volatility index, the CBOE or VX. If I click it to load it here on the chart, you can see that in the past few days, couple weeks, the candlesticks have been major when it comes to measuring the high and the low. So these are sorted in descending order. The second one would be the E-mini Russell 2000. We can see the big candles here as well. The fact that this radar screen is split up with these label rows makes sure that the commodities are kept within their groups. So we have currencies, we have financials, energy commodities, metals, and agriculture. So these are labels that you can add within your radar screen to create groups. And if you do any type of sorting, the sorting will only happen within groups. So if I double clicked here, you can see that the major markets are kept together. I can still see the volatility index in context with the other indices, and it doesn't mix commodities together. At any point, you can right click on any row, go to data, and click on add a label row. And that's the way that you split your list of symbols and add a label or a blank row. That will create separation in your radar screen so that you can sort within groups. Let's say, for example, that you don't have a preset list of symbols, that you want to do some scanning. Let's say, for example, you want to just scan the whole universe of stocks that have the highest percentage movement compared to the value of its shares. So we call that ATR volatility percentage. So let's go ahead and open up a new workspace here and show you how you can do a quick scan. I go to apps and click on scanner. Scanner is a tool that allows you to scan markets without having a preset list of symbols. The stock market listed stocks, I believe it goes beyond 11,000 different listed stocks, not counting, over the counter. So a lot of times bringing or doing a scan over those symbols is challenging, or keeping an eye on those symbols is challenging, because who can monitor 11,000 symbols? So I can come here to the scanner and try to narrow that list down. Let me go ahead and change my font here a little bit so that it's easier to read. I'm going to make it 11. All right. Perfect. And what I'm going to do is, I already have an ATR percent scan here. Let me go ahead and delete it. How do I delete it? Right click, remove scan. Yes. Data, remove scan. There you go. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a scan. I'm going to click on add here. This will be volatility, ATR, volatility, percent. I'm going to click on next. As I said before, we have access to all stocks, and I can even include OTC. Let me do all stocks without OTC because I know it's still a big number. And I'm just going to click next here. This is the scan on all stocks in the stock universe. I'm going to click next. And then I start adding my filters. I may add additional filters to rule out any other symbols. I can, or choose not to. Most of the time, I look for symbols that have liquidity or that have at least some volume so that if I do decide to trade it, I can get in and out quickly without any issues. A lot of these stocks are lightly traded or not traded at all. So sometimes you want to stay away from the stocks that could cause a problem when you want to get in or out. So maybe if I go to the volume category here and I say, I want a volume average of at least 100,000. That's 100,000 shares, average daily. Let me go ahead and run this. What I like to do is I like to run this just to see what impact my scan filters have on my results. With just one filter of volume average greater than 100,000, if I click on run, actually it didn't run it. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to run the scan. When I go to the log, I can see the results. So from the 11,026 symbols that exist in the symbol universe of all stocks, 3,988 symbols remain. Now that's impressive, with just one simple filter, I was able to eliminate, over 7,000 symbols. That's pretty impressive. So that means that 7,000 symbols, over 7,000 symbols are not meeting that criteria of trading at least 100,000 shares in average daily, which is okay. I'm going to remain with those almost 4,000 symbols. Let me go ahead and click on customize. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to use this custom indicator that I have here in my TradeStation platform. So let me click on indicator. The name of the indicator is @MC for masterclass, and the name is ATR volatility percent. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to be looking for the percent itself, and I want to show the top 100. Show me the top 100 symbols that have the highest ATR volatility percent. I'm going to run this. And this is going to run over those 4,000 symbols. It'll take a little long because this is calculating the ATR over each one of those symbols. In fact, I should have narrowed down my list of symbols a little bit further, but this is okay. I mean, this is gradually going up, slowly going up. I should have known that this was going to happen. Whenever you do a scan on an indicator, like for example, this one that I provided to you, the computer is going to use your system resources. I may not have the fastest computer out there, and that's why it's taken its time to run the calculations. But think about this. It has to download historical data for each one of the symbols, then calculate the ATR, then calculate the percentage of that ATR, and then determine whether it meets the criteria of my scan or not. Let me go ahead and cancel the scan. Okay, let me go ahead and customize and say maybe 4,000 symbols is way too much. let me add another filter and say, show me stocks that have a price between, let's go here to between. Between, I want to say 50 and 500, and change the order of these scans. I can click on the close and I can click on move up. So I need to put that filter in between. So it runs top to bottom. So it does the volume average first, then it does the price, and then it does the ATR. Let me run this. So you can see from the almost 4,000 symbols, we're down to 1,057. So this is going to run a little bit faster. So when you do scans like that, keep that in mind. A lot of the filters that are part of the scanner run on the server side. For example, if you do any scans on volume or any scans on price, like I just did, those two first filters that I applied, that is going to run on the server side, on the TradeStation server, so it spits out the results much faster. But when you do any custom easy language scans, like I'm doing here on that ATR volatility percent, that runs on your computer. So it downloads historical data onto your computer and runs the calculations on your computer. So it's going to take a little bit longer. Keep that in mind when you build your scans, because it's going to have a great impact on the speed at which they complete. So already we are at 50%. Let's wait and see what are the top. I think I left it at the top 100 symbols, and that's exactly what it's going to return to me. While that's completing, let me go ahead and remind everyone that we have the Options Education Center. When you go to TradeStation.com and you go to the Learn section, you have Options Education here. This is an education center that we released early this year. But if you scroll down, you have strategies that you can explore. So we have articles that are written on a lot of these strategies. For example, bull call spread, an article on index options. If you're interested, for example, on futures options, you can click on these content cards and it'll take you to an article that you can read about futures options. Many of these articles will have a video that you can play and watch. Or if you'd like to read, you can just go on to the article and read about futures options and how TradeStation supports them. Okay, but make sure that you visit the Options Education Center to explore many of the articles that we've made available there. Let me go back here to my TradeStation. Now we are at 85%. Let's just give this a few more seconds to complete, and then we'll be done. It's a simple concept. The ATR volatility indicator is simple. There are more sophisticated forms of calculating volatility, but this is just measuring ATR, how big the candles are in comparison to others, and what that movement translates into percentage by taking into account the value of the security. Simple calculation that is not built into the platform, but we can use custom studies to create it, and that way enhance the calculation. I believe that extra calculation to turn the value into a percentage allows us to compare multiple securities across the board. Otherwise, it's very difficult to compare them because, as you saw, we compared two different securities that had the same ATR, but percentage-wise, they were completely different. So now these are the top 100 symbols. Again, as we did in Radar Screen, we have the ability to sort by the indicator, which appears as a column here, and you can see that Money Lion is a security that has a high percent volatility number. Trades at $65. Is not as traded as other securities. For example, the second from the top, Dexcom, trading over 10 million shares in average, about the same price, about the same percentage. If you ask me which one of these two would make a better trading opportunity, I would probably assume that the one that has the highest volume has more liquidity and more opportunities for you to get in and out quickly if you needed to get rid of those trades. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to send us questions at education@tradestation.com. Let me go ahead and put that email address also here at the bottom of the chat. But that's it. That's the presentation for today. I want to appreciate the time that you guys spent here with me. We do the masterclass every single Tuesday at 11 a.m. Tomorrow, we're going to do our Getting Started series at 10 a.m. And please check the events calendar for additional topics. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful afternoon. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.